Hey guys, we're starting chapter 5, which is all about data, interpreting data, and drawing conclusions from data. One of the ways that we will collect data for this chapter is a scatter plot. A scatter plot is where you graph the points and you don't connect them. In fact, the dots don't necessarily go in a straight, perfect line. They're kind of scattered across the coordinate plane. Okay, what are we using them for? We are using them to determine if there's a relationship between two sets of data. Sometimes we think there's a relationship, like if you've ever heard the expression, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, it seems like if somebody thought, well, if you eat apples, apples are healthy, so healthy things mean you don't get sick as often. Well, that's not necessarily true, okay? So you might look at data to determine if a relationship that you feel might be there actually is or is not there. A positive association, we might also use the word correlation, and I'm not sure I'm spelling it right, but it's good. If we're in math, I don't grade you on your spelling. Positive correlation would mean that my dots kind of go not in a straight line up, but generally in an upward direction. Okay, as the x value increases, the y value increases. For example, studying and grades. If you spend more time studying, you get better grades. Okay? Then there's a negative association or correlation. As x increases, y decreases. For example, if you play a lot of video games, if you spend lots of hours playing video games, okay, then the more time you spend, the lower your grades are going to be. So, because you just don't have time. If you're choosing to spend your time playing video games, you might not get as good of grades, okay? Because you're not studying. All right, no association. Some things don't have anything to do with each other, okay? So that would mean there's no pattern to the dots at all. An example of that would be like shoe size and grades, okay? So shoe size and grades. It's not like they have anything to do with one another. So a graph would just look like dots kind of scattered all over the place. They don't go up, they don't go down, they don't go in any pattern at all. Okay. Now, lastly, you can have data that has a pattern to it, but it's not linear. It forms a curved line instead of a straight line. For example, the path of a football. Okay, so we're throwing in the football, goes through the air, and incomplete. Did not catch the football. Lands on the ground. Okay, so there's a pattern to that data, but it's not a line. And in 8th grade, we spend all of our time, most of our time focused on linear data. But when you go to algebra next year, you will be talking about nonlinear data like exponential data and quadratic data. Now those are not vocabulary words you need to know right now, but it's coming next year. Okay, some other vocabulary that you need for this unit. First of all, a cluster. A cluster is a group of points that are very close together. Now when I say a group, I don't mean like 3. I mean a significant portion of your data. Okay? That is a cluster right there where they're all grouped together like that. All right, a whole bunch of them grouped together. Outlier. An outlier is a data point that appears outside the association. So like this point right here would be an outlier because it is not within the same line as the other dots. So in this case, this would represent a student who barely studies but gets good grades. Gets good grades without studying. And over here, we have an outlier, and this person would be the person that works hard but doesn't get good grades. Okay, these are exceptions. Now, in real life, you will have data presented to you all the time. And one thing I will stress to you is don't make life decisions based on the exception. Okay? Just because one person got a good grade without studying at all doesn't mean that you should stop studying. I also don't want you to look at this person who studied a super number of hours and still got a bad grade and say, well, it didn't matter. They still got a bad grade and they didn't study, so I'm not going to bother. Okay. Outliers in real life are things that happen. There's usually a reason for it, but we want to generally make our decisions based on the majority of the data. Okay. If we look at this graph is again about hours spent studying and test grades. What is the association? Well, I see that the data, generally speaking, is going up. So we're going to say it is positive. Is there an outlier? Yes, it's right there. On your homework, I want you to circle it. When there's an outlier, say yes, and I want you to tell me the coordinates of that outlier. Okay, I don't want is there an outlier to be a yes or no question. Is there a cluster? Again, both for outliers and clusters, guys, if it's not super obvious, if you're like, well, I'm not sure. If you're not sure, then the answer's no. There's no cluster to this data. All right, estimate the score of someone who studied for 9 hours. Okay, so see how I highlighted the general path of the dots here in green? What we're looking at is if somebody studied 9 hours, where would it be reasonable for me to place another dot so that it kind of falls in that green zone? And most of my classes today have told me somewhere around there. That seems reasonable, not too high, not too low, kind of falls right in the middle of that green zone. And if I follow that across, a 95. Now, does that mean if you put 94 you were wrong? No. Okay, anywhere in that green zone would really be acceptable. Anything from probably 90 to 100 would probably be reasonable. Okay, and they're estimates, they're not guarantees. You don't know what you're going to get until you do it. Okay. Conclusion. If you study more, your grades will be higher. So the conclusion, we're using the vast majority of the words in the title. And then we're just talking about, well, if you study more, will your grades be higher, will your grades be lower? Okay. What is the relationship here? Well, we were talking about the temperature of the ocean and the Arctic Circle, and how does that affect the polar bears? Well, the relationship, what I'm seeing is, and I'm going to have to widen this out a little bit, that generally we're going downhill. So that means my relationship is, there it is, negative. Are there any outliers? Okay, guys, we got to talk about outliers. Outliers, okay, this dot right here, I know that this dot right here that I'm pointing at, I'm going to highlight it so it shows up in pink, okay? It is really tempting to say, yeah, it's an outlier because it doesn't fit in the green zone. Well, no, it's still pretty close to the green zone, okay? So it is not an outlier at all, okay? When you're doing homework, if it's not super far away from the rest of the data, then it's not an outlier, okay? An outlier would be way down here or way up here. So there's no outliers here. If you're not sure if there's an outlier or not, then there probably isn't one, okay? Cluster, again, a couple dots close together and not a cluster. Conclusion sentence. As the water temperature increases, the polar bear population decreases. All right, apartment rents near the train station. Okay, I know that up here in upstate New York, we don't think too much about where we live in relation to a train station. In fact, we don't have a train station. We have a bus station, but no train station. However, if you've ever been to New York City, it would be important to you how close you live to the train station, and you might be willing to pay a little more in rent each month for the convenience of living closer to the train station, particularly if you don't have a car. What is the association? Well, I am seeing that the points are going down. It's a very gentle down, but it's still down, so that's negative. Is there an outlier? Yeah, like I said, it's going to be super obvious. Okay, and I'm going to say the coordinates of that outlier. Okay, a mile away, $2,100 for rent. That must be some super fancy apartment to charge that kind of rent. Is there a cluster? No. Estimate the rent with a distance of 1.6 miles. So, probably that seems reasonable right about there. Classes have been telling me today. So, that's about $500 in rent. Okay. Thank you. See you next time.